Hello, everyone. My name is Mirna. I'm a trainer from Positive Psychology and Different Skills for Trainers and Educators. And I'm happy to share this video with you in which I'll talk a little bit about tips and tricks to make virtual learning more engaging. So the idea of this video is that I share with you 5 different tips and tricks. And with each of them, I'll also share a range of reflection questions. I will invite you to sit down with these reflection questions and note down some answers. It would be great if before starting it, you choose a specific class that you will use as sort of an example, something you're delivering already or something that you're planning now and will be delivering as a class soon, and then to answer these reflection questions with really this specific class in mind. And then at our live workshop, or our live part of the workshop, we will use the time to discuss all your ideas and findings and examples of how can we turn these tips and tricks into reality and implement them in our classes. And then at the same time, I'll also add on some more tips and tricks. So with that in mind, you can approach this preparation task in 2 ways. One is to go through this video first and just hear all the tips and tricks, and then download the reflection questions that are you have it attached on the separate sheet, and then go through all the questions at once. Or you can stop the video after I share each of the tips and connected reflection questions, and then each time pause it and think of those reflection questions before you move on to the next tip. So that's up to you which process you prefer. What matters to me is that you bring in some examples and ideas into the live workshop so we can discuss them and share them. So 5 tips to make virtual learning more engaging. First of all, one thing that is probably the most important thing for any learning is that attendees, students, participants are motivated. If they come and they're motivated, then even if you don't do a perfect learning experience, and even if the process you design is not optimal maybe sometimes, still they will learn a lot. They will try hard, they will ask questions, they will look into other materials if needed. They will follow up, because if they're motivated, they'll want to learn, they'll figure out how to learn. On the other hand, if you have demotivated students who don't really care about the topic in the class, then no matter what a great class you do, they might have fun, they might even kind of be engaged and curious about it, but they won't really learn because they don't really deeply care about the topic. Of course, motivation is something that we cannot build up from zero. If people come into the class and they don't really care and they're not motivated, we can't create that. But one thing that we can create is to remind them of their motivation. So some of the best ways of doing that is to remind them how this class relates to real life. What are the goals of this class? What are we learning or trying to achieve on it? And how do these goals relate to their life or their job or their future job or anything else? At the same time, a really powerful way of reminding and kindling their motivation is to ask them, why is this class important for you? And give them a moment to think or maybe to share. These are just some examples. When we think of motivation of adult learner, one of the things that is most motivating is connection with the real life. So that's something we always want to keep in mind. How does our learning connect to their reality, to their life out of the classroom? But there are other things that motivate people. It could be just mental curiosity, being engaged in solving a puzzle or figuring something out. It could also be, desire for compliance and, to score well on that exam, or maybe desire to support the rest of the group in their learning. Whatever it is, the task for reflection for you is to think about how can you apply this in your class? How can you think a little bit? How am I motivating people in my class? Do you share goals of the learning at the beginning? And in which way do you do that to make them appealing and to make them motivational? And how do you, in general, motivate them for those goals? How do you motivate them to be engaged in the classroom? What do you do before the class or at the beginning of the class? What are any big or small things that you can say, share, present, create, maybe as an experience or exercise, that will make your learner more motivating to figure it out. So again, you can stop the video here and answer those questions in reflection, or you can go through the video till the end and then go back to all the questions from the list. Just make sure to answer these somehow. And then let's extend the question as the next step. What else could you be doing? How could you be motivating them a little bit more? With that, we are moving on to tip number 2. And the tip number 2 is to make things simple. In virtual learning, more so than in physical classroom, one thing that is a little bit corrupt is that we miss more understanding of what is acceptable or unacceptable behavior. In the real classroom, people know that sometimes if they want to speak, they kind of see from the environment, should they raise their hand, should they not, is it okay to ask a question if they have it, or should they not ask it now, is this interactive workshop or a process or not so much. In virtual classroom, that becomes much less obvious. People can see less of your cues and indications what is acceptable, what is not, and they also see less options from their colleagues. So one thing that we want to do on virtual workshop is definitely tell them, make it very clear and very explicit. What are the right ways and the options in which they can participate? Make it the clear expectations, but also clear tools and clear options. Let me give an example on that. You could tell them that right now, while you're presenting some part, you're not open for them to voice their questions and get into discussion, but you would love to hear their questions in chat. Or you could say they can interrupt you at any time if they ask for word in such and such way. And then depending on the platform, it can mean they raise the virtual hand, or they raise the hand on video, or they ask for word in chat, or they just unmute and start speaking. The point is, you should give them clear options. You can unmute and start speaking whenever you have a question. Or please hold on till end of this part of my presentation, and then we'll have space for questions. One of the things that we can make explicit at the beginning is this workshop interactive or not? Are they invited to speak up at any point or not so much? And again, questions for you. What are the guidelines that you give at the beginning of your class? What kind of instructions do you give to your students? How do you provide structure in how they can interact? How do you give them clarity? And how do you make the options explicit? Do you tell them in which way they're invited to interact, specifically with which tools, in which ways, with which kind of questions or comments and so on? Or do you leave it vague? And in which ways can they interact, through which tools, and how at the beginning of your class do you make them aware of the options? Do you just mention, or do you actually demonstrate and ask them to try that tool out to make sure they know how to use it? In which way do you give them that options and that clarity? And of course, the follow-up question is, how can you do that more in your future classes? The tip number 3 in the virtual engagement is to re-engage the attention. The question I like to say here is, if they get off the highway in terms of their attention, when is the next chance for them to get back on? Is the next entry point back onto the highway 3 kilometers away or 30 kilometers away? How easy is it for them when they lose their attention to bring it back? And this is really important because in virtual learning, attention is more inconvenient and difficult and tricky than in physical classroom. We get distracted more easier. There's more environment that distracts us. There is less presence in the class itself. Attention is difficult to hold, even for a very motivated participant or student. Even for somebody who really is interested in the topic, it's hard to keep the attention sharp. That's why we want to think on one side, how to often, every 10 minutes or so, how can we re-engage their attention? Every 10 or 15 minutes, can we maybe create a small surprise, ask them a question, give them a chance to comment, create some sort of action or interaction or activity that can help them get re-engaged? And of course, this activity should be supporting the learning process, not distracting them from it. It's not about clicking on something. It's about calling them back into the learning topic. And then the next connected thing is, if they do lose their attention, even though they're interested, if their attention slips away, how can they come back? How can you enable it for them to easily come back? And something that can really help here is to have a very clear structure, such as to split things in, numerated points. Number one, topic number two, like our 5 topics today, for example, and then do summaries at the end. We talked about these 5 things, and this is what we said, and let's repeat. But while we are repeating, think about which were the most relevant for you, and so on and so on. Another way that really helps people come back in an easier way is to chunk the content down in smaller parts, in smaller bits, instead of presenting a big block of information, to chunk it into smaller bits and then connecting these bits. Not to go any longer, questions for you. In your class, how often do you re-engage attention? Do you have any further ideas how you could do that better? And then especially, how could you make it easier for them to come back if for a moment they lose attention? How could you invite them back, but also just give them more clarity on how to come back? Where were you? Where are you now if they got lost? With that, let's go to question number 4. The tip number 4 is all about making it more interesting. And that's something that ideally we also want to use in physical classes, of course, but also in virtual. That's something that, we are less present. Our way of speaking and physical attributes are less, present and less strong. And that means we need to use our words even more carefully and powerfully. We want to make things colorful and concrete. We want to implement stories and examples. We want to paint the picture for them with our words. We want to really create things to be tangible, to involve some words that invite for different senses or different emotion. For things that we share with them, we want to try to have them see it in their mind, touch it in their mind, feel what you're talking about, maybe even smell it or taste it, whatever it is that you're presenting. So involving emotion and senses in any way makes it really, really engaging. And storytelling or concrete life examples are great ways of doing that. Maybe even bringing props on video. With that tip, questions for you. How do you make your class interesting right now? How are you building for that interest and curiosity and tangible, concrete examples for your students in your words, or maybe in bringing something in? And then how do you incorporate stories, colors, examples, senses, emotions? And then, of course, how could you do more of that in the future? And tip number 5, making learning active. In the end, for people to truly learn, they have to reflect and mentally process, cognitively process whatever is that you're trying to transfer. It's really hard for people to actually just remember because we mentioned something. Only once they learn and they come up with their own thoughts and conclusions will that learning actually stick, and will it be meaningful for them. That's why we are trying to make people interested and engaged in whatever we are doing. You can say in a way that that's kind of like making them hungry for knowledge and for information before you give them that information. Asking them a question or giving them puzzle that they need to solve before you offer them a theory or a model or knowledge that we have that solves that very same problem. Ask them to solve it first. Ask them what their thoughts and knowledge are. Let them figure it out. Or the same thing, after we share with them maybe a model or a thing that we discuss, ask them how would they implement it. Don't tell them, ask them to figure it out. In this way, making learning active really makes them figure it out in their specific reality, and also makes them more inclined to actually use it. That's kind of what we are doing here with me making you think about all those questions, how to implement these things. So in Making Learning Active, questions for reflection about your own class are: how are you making learning active? How are you encouraging and supporting students to actually think in your class? How are you not just pouring the knowledge in their heads, but how are you actually making them actively think? Active learning, engaged virtual learning is not about having them talk a lot or having them click on a lot of things and tools. It's about making them think about the questions, about the discussions, raising their curiosity, making the learning active and a little bit experiential and with different perspectives and cognitively engaging. For that to happen, please think about how are you doing it already, but then also think about possibilities. How could you do that even more in your class? What are some new ideas you could bring in? And we'll happily share all these ideas with each other together on the live part of our class. So thank you very much for staying with me through these 5 tips and ton of reflection questions. You can always come back to this video or just download the reflection questions and go through them. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you at the class soon, and then actually discussing these things in real life and exchanging some more tips and tricks, and especially ideas and experiences, how to implement this more and how to make it more real in your classes. Thank you. See you soon.